primer basically on TIF. TIF has been around since 1975, and there have been two major changes to TIF law since 1975. The big one came in the 2003-2004 session. There have been a lot of changes, and if you get into TIF law, it is very cumbersome and burdensome because they never clean it up. They just put amendments in there and amendment after amendment. So you'll see the fourth largest city had boundaries on Lake Michigan. Well, who is that? That language never names a city, but you can bet it's either Sheboygan or Racine, almost every time. But the single largest, the background on TIF was to spur industrial development and also redevelopment. So you're going to have these arguments, right or wrong, that is it for redevelopment or for industrial development. That changed in 2003, 2004. TIF, how does it work? I believe that TIF is the single most powerful local economic development tool there is. It allows local control of your economic development process. And the way it works is you have a base value, your assessed value. It's frozen when a TIF is created. So for example, it's $1 million, and you have a project coming in that's going to create a new value of $11 million. The $10 million, the taxes on that $10 million difference come back to the TIF district. They don't get dispersed to the taxing entities. So when TIFs are created, the county, city, school district, who you can argue really doesn't affect them, and the technical college. In some cases, you have sewerage districts and lake districts that come into play too. They forego that revenue until the TIF is paid off. So your cap, you stay even to what you have the day the TIF is created. You will not receive new money from that district going forward. And remember, you all agree to this. How it works is you have a joint review board. This is probably the single most important body in the process. The city goes through the city process through the committee, plan commission, redevelopment authority, the city council of so-called creating the TIF district. Oh, they don't create the TIF district. The joint review board does, and DOR finally approves it. The joint review board consists of a representative of each taxing entity, the school district, the city, the technical college, the county, and one independent citizen appointed by the city. 5 members make the decision of whether or not there's a TIF district to be created, amended, or terminated. These are the rules to watch. Did I skip that? Okay. These are the rules to watch when you're evaluating a TIF. First of all, it's got to meet the 12% test. If it's over that, DOR is not going to approve it anyway. So make sure, well, technically they shouldn't approve it, and technically they have approved it over 12. But 12%, more than 12% of your value in a TIF district, you can't create another one. So if they're going to create a new TIF district and you're over 12% assessed in a TIF district, you can't create it. And you as a joint review board member should say no. And the type of TIF, I should talk developers agreements. This was a change in 2003 that requires, if there's a developer involved, the city must get a developer's agreement for that individual developer. In the past, that was not a requirement for the gentleman's agreement or a ladies and gentlemen's agreement. Now it is a requirement. So you need to have the developer's agreement spelled out between the city and the developer and shared to the joint review board. The type of TIFs also made a big change in 2003 because it's a real uneven playing field in development. Let's be fair. A redevelopment TIF has a longer life. The simple reason they start at a negative position. When you have a redevelopment TIF on your city's core, for example, and I'm sure Two Rivers will be dealing with this in the very near future, many times you have to take down the base value before you can build it up. So if you have a building that is worth $2 million, but needs to be taken down, until you build something that's $2,001,000, you get any credit for that increment, and that's only a $1 increment. Whereas if you go into an industrial park or a greenfield site, you're starting pretty much at 0 value, because it's at farmland use value, and that averages between $300 or maybe $500 an acre. You put a building on there that's a $2 million building, you're going to get that $2 million increment. And for your finance guys, $1 million, rule of thumb, throws out about $20,000 revenue a year. Okay? So that's $20,000 of tax revenue. It might be a little bit higher, but I'm taking the 20 mil rate, the rule of thumb. The big change in 2003 is the introduction of a mixed-use TIF. In the 90s, there were some bad actors, and they used TIF to design golf courses with housing on them. So housing was no longer allowed. The legislature didn't like that, so they made a change. 2003, a bigger issue for a lot of economic development folks was workforce housing close to the work sites. Mixed-use TIF districts allowed housing to be reintroduced into TIF. There's some specific requirements for the housing on both density or on urban conservation on the way they are designed. Those are the specifics to it. I will venture to bet that 90% of all TIFs created right now fall into the mixed-use category. Just because it is the most flexible and easiest to meet. The issue with industrial, not a big issue, it's the zoning. People don't like the heavy-duty industrial use zoning a lot of times because it requires 51% industrial zoning, and that's more of a plan commission issue on zoning requirements. Redevelopment, the downside to redevelopment is the blight designation. 51% of the properties have to be designated as blighted. Nobody, a lot of city council, a lot of plan commissions hate to go that route because you're going to your neighbors and friends and saying, hey, your house is blighted. You know, they don't like to hear that too much. So that one is a difficult one to do. But the bright spot for redevelopment and the change, and this has been, I think, one of the issues recently here, is the fact that in 2003, that change in legislation allowed other TIF districts to donate excess proceeds to redevelopment TIF districts. Because as I said, they're at a disadvantage to begin with because their base is set artificially high and they have a longer life and they are allowed to receive donations. This is the one major test that the Joint Review Board has to do on the creation. Would this development occur but for this TIF designation? Would this development occur today, immediately, if there is no TIF? If you can say that the developer is going to do this without the TIF, you shouldn't be creating a TIF. But if you're saying that if I don't do this now, and it's going to take 20 years to get the development, that passes about fourth test in my opinion. So the development must only occur because you're creating a TIF. And many times, and I stress this with the LTC board, it's more than a simple financial determination. You need to look at the infrastructure requirements and the timeline requirements. Industrial park development versus redevelopment are two different animals. So, I mean, sure, I have this nice industrial parcel out here, and we know eventually it's on an interchange of an interstate, it's going to develop, right? But is it going to develop tomorrow, or is it going to develop in 15 or 20 years? And that's the question you need to ask. As a member, a public member, please examine the pro forma payback to ensure that it's reasonable. Because the taxing entities do not benefit, except perhaps the city, until the TIF is paid back. Remember, the Joint Review Board members are foregoing all that extra revenue until after the TIF is closed. So you want to look at the pro forma of what is the payback period, because even though a TIF could be lasting for 20 years, I haven't seen one proposed anywhere that goes much beyond 12 when they do the original projections. There's an abundance of caution usually when communities do this. So look at that. One rule, this is more for municipalities and the local taxing entities and the school board, ensure that and what I would tell our Joint Review Board members is ensure the TIF closes with a very, very healthy cash balance. If that means keeping it open an extra year, keep it open an extra year. That's just a trick of the trade, because one thing, when that tax balance is collected, and all the debts are paid, the pro rata share goes back to the taxing entities, and that doesn't count against levy caps. And ensure that the but-for condition is met. Charles?
Since I'm really a dummy in this, I want to use a practical example for you to help illustrate your points. The most well-known TIF district is the one that includes Harbor Town. So I wasn't covering the city at the time that that TIF district was created. I think it was probably around 2004. Was in essence the judgment made that unless we create a TIF district and enable the borrowing of an expenditure of funds on streets and sewers and streetlights, and don't try to force Commercial Horizons to pay for it out of their pocket, they're not coming. So there is the but-for. If Commercial Horizons had been told, we as a city are not going to extend Dewey. We're not going to create Challenger Lane. We're not going to create a storm detention pond, although the state's going to require you to have one. We're not going to create streetlights. If they had been told that, then Clisters and Wires and Gorski might have said, okay, we'll move to some town that will create that infrastructure and finance it with whatever means you decide. And that's how that project then took shape.
We could just answer the but-for. Right? They're going to go somewhere else but where you're making that investment in infrastructure.
Anybody around that can vouch that's basically how it went down?
Wasn't the old county building out there too, the county healthcare, that they sold for, I don't know,
3.125 million.
okay. And they were using that as part of the down payment to develop that, I think back in the day. It was just another part of the scenario that was there.
I've been involved in a lot of TIF projects, but
Yeah.
not in there.
So yeah, I guess maybe an interesting question would be, how often does the city get involved in a stare down with the developer and ultimately say, no, we're not going to do this as a TIF district, we dare you not to come here, and the developer goes, okay, then I'm not.
The same developers you're speaking to, the city of Green Bay did that to them, and they're in Ashwaubenon on the Ameriprise building.
Okay.
So I mean, it's true. They will do that. So, but it doesn't benefit anyone when you're competing against one another. But they will do that. Do you want the development long term or do you not? That's a big question. The more speculative ones are the ones where you go out and develop your business parks. Our downtown in Green Bay, Nicolay National Bank would be an example of that too. They came in, same developer. That evening, we have many options of where we can go. And they do. And it's more expensive to go in that particular location. So the city did level the playing field for them.
And I think to Charlie's point, and Mayor Nichols could probably answer this better because I think you were maybe on the council at that time, but I think Charlie's point is it's a gamble, it's a risk, because unless you say no, you don't know if they're going to do it or not. So I think it becomes a little bit of a game of a chicken. Who's gonna blink first? Are you willing to lose the project by saying no, and they might do it anyway, or they might not? And I think it probably becomes a little bit of a gamble. But there's no way to know whether or not they're going to move ahead without the TIF dollars until you say no, and then you run the risk of losing the project. So I would say it is a gamble. Not only that project, but every TIF that we approve. But so far, our gambles have, for the most part, paid off. But it's not, by no means guaranteed, I would say. I know Mayor, if you.
Yeah, since I've been mayor, there's been one that said if you don't do this, we will do you one somewhere else. So, absolutely.
And then you have to do your
Because we're competing against Green Bay, Sheboygan, and Appleton, which are all larger markets, which larger businesses would love to go to instead. So this is the huge tool for us.
Given the competitive nature of the environment with different municipalities willing to cut each other off at the knees, frankly, to get development, tax-based employment opportunities, my experience has been oftentimes TIFs aren't viewed anymore as an incentive by the developer. They're viewed as baseline.
the expectation.
And you can be pure if you want, but unless you're in a universe by yourself, there's going to be someone that's not so pure and they'll get the development. But there's not a joint review board that meets if there's not hard and fast consideration with that but-for finding in black and white in front of that multi-jurisdictional board as part of a resolution, and it gets handed on.
With a legal opinion as to
Right.
that case too.
Absolutely.
The other thing that, when you think about TIFs, think of the disconnect at the state and local level. Where does the state get their revenue? And where do local municipalities get their revenue? The state is gonna get theirs from income tax and corporate taxes, primarily and sales tax, big ones. Local government's driven by property tax. So you notice in TIF, what consideration is given to jobs? It's all property tax. That's all, that drives it. In commercial, property tax is a lot nicer than a lot because you're not providing them services. I mean, it's a big win if you can develop your commercial base. Here's some big changes that occurred in 2010 that you need to be aware of, and this kind of exacerbated the conversations in the community. You know, we had that real estate crash. Almost all the TIF districts are created with a 0 to 1% natural growth factor, inflationary growth factor. So they're not building this up on some smoke and mirrors. There's actual development in there. We had an issue with property taxes just cratering. And I gave a presentation for Bob Ziegelbauer, for his group at the county, on where they were and where we should be. And I want to say it was in 2009 through 2010. I'm like, wow, this is amazing when I'm running the data for Manitowoc County. This is incredible. You're like one of only 5 counties in the entire state of Wisconsin that has not seen a decrease in property tax values. And now, you know, you were still ascending in property values, and that was primarily attributable to Harbor Town. But I had to tell these guys, you guys haven't felt the pain that the rest of the state had. And sure enough, next assessments, property values just plummeted. What did that do to TIF districts? They took the hit too. I was working with Sheboygan. We were about to do consulting there to do a major redevelopment project, and by some TIF reform and consolidation and so on, they had $35 million available in excess TIF capacity to do a redevelopment project. That was on October 10th. October 15th, their major TIF district lost $50 million of assessed value. They had no money available. That hit everybody. That hit everybody hard. And a couple of small towns, if you think of Warren, Wisconsin, they put in a major resort, used TIF, 800 people. It was supposed to be a $60 million development. At the end of the day, it's like a third of the way built. The developers walked away. The city had already invested $8 to $10 million in TIF with no revenue, and they're upside down. So, I mean, that's kind of, small communities need some more assistance. But what happened in 2010, you have a number of these TIF districts that all of a sudden have gone underwater through no fault of the community. I mean, everybody did what they're supposed to do. They're built out. But then the state assessments and all the other assessments just plummeted. So in 2010, there were some changes to TIF law again, which created this new category called distressed, which in layman's terms allows you to stretch the payment period out of your TIF district and allow good performing TIF districts to contribute to the poor performing TIF districts. It also kind of freezes your ability to create more TIF, or does not allow you to do more projects within those areas. But really, you had a two-found, the recent TIF districts in Manitowoc County are applying both of these principles, the 2003 law and 2010 law. 2003 allowing you to donate, 2010 allowing you to distress. That's to ensure that you can make sure that the TIF districts pay out naturally. The challenges that you'll see is really the general economy is putting stress on TIFs. The real estate market is not being very helpful until that comes back. And when you see the numbers that came out 2-3 weeks ago, which Department of Revenue, all the city managers and finance guys, that's like their Christmas in August. We see the assessed values on what's coming, or what we can afford for next year. And if there's no growth, there's no life. I mean, but that is the big deal on TIF. Is right now it's general market conditions that really hurt them. If you create a TIF today under current conditions, it will be successful. Just because you can't go anywhere without a lot of real estate. And I'm here for questions, but if, I know Greg's going to give concrete examples of how it works in scripts.
Now we can figure out how to toggle from one presentation to another, we'll be off.
Next slide, sure.